Facetarius, what's going on? It's your boy DeMarcus back with it again. And hopefully people are doing well. I know it's been crazy times in the world, but we always got to find ways to keep on pushing through and just continuing to recharge our mental and find ways to stay positive, even when things may not seem as if it's possible. And definitely easier said than done, but there are ways in which no matter what you're going through, where you can find those little pockets that can make you happy, and those little pockets that can make you appreciate your own life in a certain way. And for today's episode, it's still I had, recently had on social media where obviously I was tricking people into thinking that I was a weight that I was earlier in the year, where I weighed a lot more. And then I've obviously been in my bag, working out and just doing different things for myself that a lot of people don't know. Only like a couple people have known, and people that I've gotten a chance to talk to have known about these things and have known about my progress, but a lot of people didn't. And so, so with that, one thing that I also didn't tell but a couple folks about was the podcast. And so I'm gonna finally put that out there. The people that follow me on social media, and even for other friends that didn't know about this, they have the opportunity to be able to hear my thoughts and perspectives on my platform now, which is it's just dope. I look at it as I'm a person that I feel like I have a voice. I feel like everybody actually has a voice, but for me specifically, I just wanted to be able to have a space where I can talk about things more in depth. And people tell me often that they appreciate my words and they like my perspectives, in ways that I think outside the box. So it's been, dope for me to be able to just pick up a mic and just record. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy, and it doesn't have to be anything, outlandish or whatever, which also goes into the topic for today. So before I go into the topic, how this came about is I made a post. And only a couple people responded, but I asked what people wanted me to talk about on my podcast, if there's any type of topics that they would love me to speak on. And one of my boys, he wanted me to speak on about having regrets and imposter syndrome. And so today's episode is going to be just that. And so for those that don't know, the definition for imposter syndrome is a psychological phenomenon characterized by persistent feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, and fraudulence, despite evidence of one's achievement and abilities. I'll read that one more time. Imposter syndrome is a psychological phenomenon characterized by persistent feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, and fraudulence, despite evidence of one's achievements and abilities. Imposter syndrome. When we think about imposter syndrome, this is one that can cut deep for a lot of folks. And I know that it's one where, because of social media and just because of the way in which the world has moved, it's something that when you truly hear it, oftentimes it can be like a crushing type of word, or phrase. Imposter syndrome, it can be two words that can just be like crushing, because when you hear it and when you sense it or when you feel it, it always has like a negative connotation to it. And oftentimes this word is going to, but we have to realize that this is these are two words that have a strong upside to them. It's not a bad thing in a sense, in the way people portray it as. But imposter syndrome is something that I feel that most of us have felt. And if you haven't felt it, I would say it may be to where you may have not really been leveling up in certain areas of your life, or you really haven't been, I would say, doing some things in your life that have really challenged you. Because to have imposter syndrome, oftentimes you're feeling less than because of either competition, because of people that you've seen perform on certain levels, or because of pressures and things that you've had that have come about from the way in which you've done something, or the way in which of results that you've gotten. And so one thing to point out is that imposter syndrome is not a health disorder, but it is something that can be distressing. It can be, an experience that can really affect your self-esteem and confidence. And oftentimes, it comes from a mental thought process of you feeling that you're not good enough or you're not doing enough. And I say the first part, bringing back down the first part that I said as far as you challenging yourself, in my opinion, I feel as if you're not going to really feel imposter syndrome unless you are trying to do something to better yourself. If you're someone that's just coasting, you're just you're being complacent, you're just taking life for what it is, you probably don't have imposter syndrome because you don't really care about much. You're just like, hey, I'm just doing whatever I need to do, and that's it. Like, I'm just doing, this is the level I want to stay at, and that's it. From my experience with imposter syndrome, it has definitely been all over the place. And for this episode, I definitely want to be able to create a space to where people can feel heard and felt. And you can also hear about my experience, which the main part is you hearing about my experience, because this podcast isn't to go in about like therapy type of stuff and going in on relationships and what I think people should do and all that. I'm literally sharing my life and my perspectives, my opinions and stuff like that, but more so giving you all a space to understand about the things that I've experienced and how it's shaped in my life and ways in which I'm continuing to work to get through these things, so you can feel as if you have someone to relate to in the process. So I just want to preface that. But imposter syndrome specifically, for me, when it comes to imposter syndrome, I've had it a lot throughout my life. Being all the way transparent, like imposter syndrome has kicked my ass, and it's something where the reason it has is because of growing up in the environments that I did. And I come from a small country town, even though I grew up in a really nice neighborhood and in a place where, as far as my neighborhood, I was one of maybe two black families, and as far as my family, I was the only black family there for a long period of time in this white neighborhood. But I have two parents that came from project areas, and my dad coming specifically from the hood, where even though my mom was raised in what they would call the projects, my dad grew up in the hood where the environments were a lot different. So when you think about my experience of imposter syndrome definitely started from how it was in the household because of me hearing about my parents' experiences. And so when I think about the way in which my dad talks about how he grew up, which my mom did, and just how they've been able to navigate life, oftentimes I would have imposter syndrome because I'm like, dang, I haven't went through anywhere as close as tough of situations in which they went through. And I feel like for a lot of us to have parents that have that were raised in like lower income housing, that were raised in environments to where they had to really come from nothing, or they were pretty much against all odds. There's imposter syndrome that starts within the family first. And this is tough because, especially for us folks that have grown up in better environments because our parents wanted that for us, oftentimes the way in which they critique us and the way in which they kind of instill these principles, they're going to be very hard on us, to the point to where it's almost like you got a drill sergeant at home. And so the reason why they're coming at us like this is because they don't want us to get involved in the environments that they were involved in, and they knew how tough it was in those environments, so they don't want us to fall off the ledge per se. And so you often have imposter syndrome from there because there's toughness that's being taught in the house. And so you're feeling as if, again, I'm like, anything that I do, I've got to make sure that I keep on a narrow path. I got to be able to make sure my head's straight, and I got to make sure that I find a way just to push through, because in any sense, if I do something that's looked at as any slight bit soft, or I have a moment of where I need to show any type of emotion, I'm gonna feel like I can't really say much. So I'm gonna have imposter syndrome because I'm gonna feel like I'm comparing it. I'm trying to. I'm not being able to add up to the strength of where my parents are. So for a lot of us, again, that's where the first imposter syndrome comes into play. And again, in the definition of imposter syndrome, it's inadequacy, self-doubt, and fraudulence despite evidence of one's achievements and abilities. And again, because when you think about, fraudulence, I wouldn't say is a part of this, but when your parents, especially in the black community, when parents talk about, or let's just say communities in general, because there could be people that are for other communities as well too, that went from nothing to something. So I don't want to just say black community. Oftentimes, like when our parents come from those rough environments, or they come from, say if you come from an immigrant household where somebody has traveled from another country here, they didn't have nothing. The work the strength that they had to have, the things that they missed out on. There's a level of grit and a level of toughness that they have to instill, and there's also this big part of or these pieces of life in which they didn't get to experience. So there's going to be that piece of growing up fast, and so that whole spectrum comes into this idea of toughness that oftentimes whenever we express our emotions as children, even as adults, parents, they're going to feel as if we're soft, and they're oftentimes not going to understand it because they're always going to associate their level of toughness or what they went through as the ceiling. Like for us, we haven't gotten anywhere close to that, quote unquote, in their eyes. So we're going to feel like there's self-doubt. We're going to feel inadequate because we're going to be like, okay, like nothing I experience is going to add up to this level, but it shouldn't be like that. And that just comes from a hustle hard society. That comes from a society where it's like, okay, everything's in a sense is based off of, when you're growing up, based off of how tough you are. It's based on putting in hard work. But you realize as you get older, yes, hard work is a big key, but the people that are truly successful at the top levels, it wasn't just from hard work. Really, it was from working smarter. Because at the end of the day, if we think about it, yeah, there's some people that have gotten to the top because of hard work, obviously. But when we think about your average day-to-day person, some of them work very hard, whether that's in factories, whether that's in hospitals, whether that's in restaurants. Like these are in a sense construction. These are industries that require you to do hard work. But we've also realized in this world that we live in that for a lot of these individuals, they haven't got any type of return that they should have on their investment. Like we know that they should. Teachers, that's hard work right there. You're taking care of people's kids while their parents are at work, and you're having to, in a sense, be a mentor. You're in a sense having to be a parent throughout the day as a kid is sitting there for 8 hours or longer. And these are, when you think about the hard work that these individuals instill, we know as a society they should be getting paid way more, and they should be appreciated way more for the type of time and energy that they put in. But unfortunately, society doesn't reward that. So when we think about hard work in general, hard work is truly not respected. We also live in a money hungry society where it's like, however much money you have, that's going to be the person that gets the most clout, the person that gets the most attention, most appreciation, and it's going to be the person that's looked at as the celebrity or the person that's on top. Again, hard work isn't truly appreciated how it should be. So going back to the parent piece, when we think about our parents, a lot of them had to come from environments where they were working in those industries. They didn't have where they could just get a tech job that's paying them $6K. They didn't have where they can do travel nursing where they get paid 10 to 12 racks coming out of college. Like they didn't have where they can just go in and be an entrepreneur, getting loans so easily, going to all these different conferences, whatever it was. So to them, it's like, hey, I had to put in this true hard work. I had to really work my butt off. And so that's what hard work looks like. And because you as their child, their young adult, older, whatever it is, you as their child, because you haven't had to go through that, then it's deemed as, oh, you haven't worked as hard. So then that's where your self-doubt starts. So I know I drug that out, but I really wanted to go into a deep dive about that, because for a lot of us, that's where our self-doubt and feeling inadequate can come in at first. Okay, so as you continue to grow as an individual, obviously you realize that, and it depends on the household, a lot of parents, they're not even trying to do that intentionally. That's just because of how they grew up and because of the principles that were instilled in them. And for some of them, even though they had parents that may have had one in the household, they may have had both, or they may have had none, but their parents are probably working to the point to where now they've had to be an adult earlier and show up for their brothers and sisters and things like that. So now the way in which they see the world is a lot different. So it may take them more time to even understand your perspective because they're only able to see it from one lens. But again, I feel like for most parents, they're not necessarily trying to like cut you down. They just really don't understand. And so over time, like once you have conversations with your parent, unfortunately for those that are not able to, you still are learning things in different ways, and they're learning as well. But one thing I can definitely say based on my experience is that one thing that'll crush a parent, especially one that cares about their kids and want to be in their kids' life, is a parent that hears from their child that they don't feel supported or feel as if they're not being heard. Like, no parent wants to feel as if their child doesn't feel supported or don't have what they need, because that's a parent's job. Your parent is to be there for your kid. And even from my experience and stuff like that, I know there's been times where I've said that I didn't feel like I had this or feel supported in this way. And I can not only see the reactions of the gestures on my parents' face or the reactions, but I've also heard it in their tones, and then later on in conversations that we've had. But let's move forward. So when we think about imposter syndrome specifically for us as individuals in our career and what that looks like in the next step, oftentimes the traumas and then what we can experience in the household can carry over a whole lot. Why? Because then we get to this next step of trying to figure out what it takes to even open up. What exactly do we want to do? Who do we want to be? So that's the next step, because oftentimes, again, when our parents are coming from their environments, a lot of times for them it's like, hey, if it's not sports, it's working, right? If it's not, maybe if they were gifted in like singing, entertainment in some sort of way, unless they came from the church, like, it's working. And so for us, when we're trying to explore these different hobbies or these different areas of life, then like when we're trying to experience these, oftentimes it comes from a place of where we don't have somebody that has excelled in it to a high level where they can truly give us the advice that it takes to either go in that direction, be great in it, and have longevity. And so we have imposter syndrome because we run into a thing to where somebody in our life, a parent, cousin, or whatever, could have tried that. They could have been really good at it, decent at it, or whatever. But even what we envision on where we're trying to get to and the level that we can take that, they haven't gotten there. But oftentimes, because of egos, because of people getting validated in their communities, they feel as if they're the person that can speak on it in the way that can help to benefit you, when in reality they really can't. So that creates imposter syndrome, because now you're hearing all these voices around you and feeling as if, okay, I might as well listen to such and such because they was able to do this. Such and such said that they was the coldest in the community. They knew them back in the day. But in reality, that really ain't helping us, because why? People are used to older systems. They're used to what used to work. But you realize as time changes, as people, we've got to change. We've got to be able to get used to the new things that are a part of our lives. We've got to be able to get accustomed to this new ways of living. And oftentimes you'll see to where a lot of elders, they're not doing that. They can stay in that complacent zone. They can continue to hit those ceilings because it's easier to stay in that validation spectrum, or it's easy to stay in those places where people can to where you can be focused on the old you and not moving forward with the new you. Because a lot of them, for them getting to the levels that they've gotten to them, that's paradise. Should it be like that? No, because you see a lot of people, even from their eras, where they never stop there, but it just is, it gets into a mentality thing, and that's what we'll talk about in later episodes. But all mentalities aren't created equally. And at the end of the day, even for some of the toughest people that you can see in your life, there can still be pieces, a lot of pieces that they're missing. Why? Because the world ain't going to stop. The world ain't just going to throw money in your hand. You got to actually really get out here and work for this stuff. So, going back to the piece on when we try to level up. So, for instance, you could be somebody like myself where you're trying to learn how to cook, right? And so we know that back in the day when it came to church and everything, most of the time, especially in the South, everybody knows how to cook in your family. And, some people may not. You're going to have that one person that's just outstanding compared to the others. But most people, as far as families, know how to cook. And whenever church ends, you either gather at somebody's house, you're having different times throughout the year, whether that be holidays or you're gathering, all that type of stuff. The point that I'm getting to is, imagine coming from from environments where people know how to cook, but you're somebody that's wanting to learn how to cook. And so there may be certain dishes that you make, you're going to have imposter syndrome, because when somebody try your food and be like, oh, that's not it. They ask you how you doing it. They like, man, I've been cooking for forever. This is how you're supposed to do it. And they telling you all these things that you should do, right? And that creates imposter syndrome because you have where somebody's been doing it on a certain level, or they may have been doing it for a long period of time. So now they feel as if they're qualified to tell you all these things that you should be doing. It's different if they're coming to you and giving you advice in a positive way. But oftentimes people will tell you what they think that you should be doing, or they tell you that you're not qualified due to them feeling that they have longevity in it. But the thing with imposter syndrome, what we have to do is we got to continue to level up in ways where we continue to try it. We can't always just tell people what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. We have to continue to invest in ourselves, and we have to continue to put energy and effort into it, a lot of times without those folks knowing. And so you learn early on that oftentimes when you share a good amount of information, that can put you kind of in a bind, because for some people that haven't had to work on learning how to be able to work with others, or learning how to express themselves, or learning how to see somebody else grow, they're going to always think that longevity plays way above people learning. And what I mean by that is, just because I've been in an environment for 10, 15 years, whether I've done it, even if I just seen it or whatever, based on how older folks think is, okay, I know what's best, or I know what's going on, or I know how to do that. But the challenge is that no matter what you know how to do or whatever, you got to allow people a space to be able to be creative in their own ways. And so for us, like going back to the cooking example, I'm someone where I had to learn that. When I first started off cooking, I didn't want to go back home because the environment that I was from, there wasn't nothing to do. People was doing the same old stuff. I was like, I literally just graduated high school. Like, I don't want to keep doing the same thing. I want different experiences. And so I remember that, like, for me, a big part of not wanting to come back home is because there wasn't anything to do. And so I'm like, okay, if I can't come back home, that means I'm going to miss out on getting soul food, that home cooked food that I like. So you know what? A big thing I got to do is learn how to cook. And so oftentimes I'm a person in how I grew up where not even just in the household, but I always feel like people were trying to tell me what to do. People wouldn't let me express myself in the way that I wanted to express myself. Even if I was wrong, great. Let me learn how to be wrong, whether it's friends or whatever. I'm cool with being wrong. But when you're in an environment so many times to where people are looking at you crazy, people are trying to act like you don't know what you're talking about, people are trying to make it seem as if like your thought processes are crazy, that's in your mind. You're going to be like, I can't wait till I get to a point to where I can truly learn how to express myself. And so you're going to have times where you may be like over talking people. You may get frustrated or mad during conversations. Why? Because you've had so many years of you kind of having to hold everything inside, and you not being able to share your perspectives, to where you get to the point to where you're like, now I can finally learn how to express myself. So a big point for me was early on in college when, again, I started cooking, going out and meeting people, all that type of stuff. Even when I didn't know how to do it, I still found ways for myself to be able to challenge myself. That was the only way that I knew that I can get out of that comfort zone / full imposter syndrome. And I say full because I was able to cut that down a lot. And I'm going to explain that more as I go along, and how you grow steadily out of that, piece by piece. But when I was in full imposter syndrome, how I was able to break that down is by challenging myself. So that started off by me cooking. Yeah, I couldn't cook for nothing when I first started. The baking contest that I was in, like, it was a recipe and something my mom had from offline, and I was like, you know what, let me utilize this while I'm in for this competition. And so I won that, but it was like I didn't have any type of background in culinary, nothing like that. I just enjoyed cooking a little bit. And so over time, let's say from my freshman to sophomore year, I couldn't cook for nothing. Like, it was solid food, in a sense good for me, but like I wasn't like a good cook at all. It was just stuff that I could make that was pretty solid. But here's the thing. When you're somebody that you're willing to continue to try things and you're continuing to elevate, you're going to be a person that is going to be way ahead of everybody else. Why? Because it goes with anything. So many people are talkers. So many people want to be able to negotiate about this and that. They want to talk about what somebody's not doing. They want to put people down, and they always want to critique about what the next person's doing. But when you're younger, and again, if you're somebody that didn't really have the space to be able to speak up, you're going to get so frustrated and mad with that, because you're like, okay, the moment that I'm trying to actually challenge myself and better myself, now somebody wants to speak up in a way to where like they're trying to demean what I got going on. They're trying to come at everything. They're showing hate and they're showing jealousy. And I've experienced this so much in my life, because the ways in which I would express myself would be different. I had to learn how to get away from the crowds, because following the crowds never did anything for me. Never did anything for anybody, but definitely not for me. Because I realized that there were so many times where people were stuck and complacent, and I was like, this don't even sound right. This don't even feel right. So again, over time, as I was cooking, I would see people give me critique. They're telling me this and that. So in my head, I'm getting so frustrated, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not that good. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I should. But something in me told me to keep on going. And I also had to learn, as I talked about in previous episodes, how to be able to instill some type of discipline. So you got to realize that even when you're trying to do certain things, this also goes into you starting to be a talker. So, hey, okay, I got this time where I'm actually learning how to be able to cook a little bit. Okay, so I'm feeling that I could do any and everything. So then I go into this phase of like talking about all these things, but not actually completing a lot of things. Why? Because now I have the space to be able to while I'm doing something, to actually talking about it. So you know what I'm going to do is, all those times where I didn't have space to talk, even if I'm not going to complete something, I just want my voice being heard. So now I'm going to talk about all these things. So now DeMarcus is talking about all these things he's going to do, talking about all these things he can do. And hey, there's a bunch of things in which he was able to do that he may not necessarily be able to do now. Or he might not be, hey, there was times where I was cold at basketball, cold at football, but like, okay, you ain't been working out your freshman, sophomore year, so you gained a lot of weight. You ain't gonna be able to move and be that same type of athlete that you once was. But because you ain't had a space to talk before, you're gonna keep on talking, and you're going to be able to talk as much as you can until you got to show up on the action. But that goes into the imposter syndrome, because now you feel as if, because you didn't have the space to be able to communicate, you've had self-doubt at certain points. Now you can talk your way into being a certain type of person. That don't mean that you ain't about what you're talking about, but like eventually you're going to run out of so much talk, and you got to show up with action. But moving forward, as I continue to be able to grow, I had to learn how to get comfortable with myself. And so that was where, even during times of me hearing these certain things that people were saying or whatever, I had to learn just to keep pushing through with that. I had to learn to keep on cooking. I had to learn to keep on finding ways to be able to challenge myself, going to the gym, having multiple times of losing weight, gaining weight, losing weight, gaining weight, and then getting to a point to where then you look crazy out of shape, to where you really got to change your mindset and say, you know what? I gotta do something, because now I've talked myself so far left that to get back right, now I gotta really, really get in my bag. And so this is over time where you start to learn discipline. You start to learn how to lock in certain areas. So again, as you're doing this is where you learn how to be able to slowly get out of imposter syndrome, because not only do you realize that now your anger and frustration is attacking you, you're realizing that, hey, I'm slowly getting further away from who I know that I can be. That person that I said to myself I was, the person that I kept talking to in the mirror, and the person that I actually saw within myself, the person that I actually value, now I'm actually losing that person. And so now we're just talking about imposter syndrome from let's say a parent standpoint, to now as you're starting to grow as a young adult, to where you have friends. Even when you're younger, we have friends, cousins, family, whatever, that are kind of belittling you or kind of lowering you in a bit. So getting past that. So I'm going to go ahead and go into part 2, but we're going to talk about how I continue to be able to elevate into that, and then also learn about not having regrets. So this is part 1. Part 2 is coming up. Yes.